Hi everyone, it's Melissa, and this is going to be my video of reviews and ranking for the Booktube Prize finals. And this time I am reading for translated fiction. So I just finished the first of 6 books, and let's see if I can remember all of the names. I read Disquiet by Zülfü Livaneli. This was translated by Brendan Freely, and the narrator was Semi Yeroham. I think I will make sure everything's below. I have some mixed feelings about it. So this novel follows a journalist who is from a small town village in Turkey, but is he living in Istanbul? I want to say he's living in Istanbul. So he's moved to the city. He's a journalist, and he goes back to his town, kind of investigating a little bit the death of an old childhood friend. This friend had kind of abruptly left his fiance, and then got engaged to a Syrian refugee. Then he moved to Germany and was killed there, and his body's been brought back to his town for burial. And so he goes to investigate this, and he kind of gets a little bit obsessed with not just digging through the story, but as he's digging through the story of what happened, he gets obsessed with this quote-unquote other woman, this Syrian refugee, and obsessed with finding her. So that's the story in a nutshell. So what did I think about the book? I liked the writing. It wasn't overly poetic or lyrical or flowery or anything like that, but there was something about the turn of phrase I just found very beautiful but sad, or beautiful but grotesque. That was probably my favorite part of the book. I found the story overall to also be interesting, and I think there were a few things that he was saying about world events and what's happening with refugees and racism and Islamophobia, and there were other kind of social issues, but I do have problems with it. So there were definitely quite a few parts where some of the women characters just felt, I don't know if caricaturized is the right word, stereotyped. I think some of the depictions of women weren't well done, and some of the ways the character thinks about women is also stereotyping that woman, and it was hard for me to see whether that was the character or the author. So I had a problem with some of that, but my biggest problem comes with the translation itself, which I never would have really picked up on probably if it wasn't for Jen from Remembered Reads, because she went on a journey piecing together what happened here, and I'm not sure I would have picked up on it or not. But basically, to summarize what she found, so in the original book, the character that had been killed had gone back to America and was murdered there by a white supremacist or someone who was Islamophobic or something like that. But in the translated version, he goes to Germany and is murdered by a neo-Nazi there. But it didn't really, I think how Jen figured this out is some of the phrases used didn't match culturally with a neo-Nazi in Germany and didn't really seem to make sense. I'm not reviewing the original text, right? I'm reviewing the translated text, so I have to take that into account. And although I think I liked this book for the most part, like I said, I had a little bit of problems with some of the parts depicting women. I liked a lot of other things about it, but I can't disregard this because I think it's just incredibly disingenuous, and just making a change like that. That has no business being part of translation and changing setting, because you're taking away certain context of the story. And so because of that, it's left me feeling very kind of like about this book. So I will check back when I've read the next book. I have finished How to Order the Universe by María José Ferrada, translated by Elizabeth Bryer. This is about a girl in Chile, I think, and it details a roughly 2-year period of her life between the ages of about 7 and 9, where she accompanies her father, who's a traveling salesman. She skips school. They kind of keep this secret from her mother, the fact that she's skipping all this school and stuff. And the girl has a way of kind of ordering the world or thinking about the world in the same way that you would think about the inventories and the lists that she and her father would have to make as salespeople. So it kind of explores her way of thinking and making sense of her world in this way. It's a super short book, very simply written, and not a ton of plot. So my initial reaction, or my reading experience, wasn't the best. As I was reading it, I kind of got to the end and thought, that's it? What was the point of that? But it's something that I think is growing on me, and I think it's not a story that's immediately obvious, and she definitely doesn't handhold you. Initially, the simple writing wasn't really my thing, but I do think it makes sense for the narrator, given her age and just her very clear-cut, organized, ordered way of trying to compartmentalize the world. I think it invites the reader to ask questions about how we view our world, our experiences, how we write and kind of rewrite our memories and our experiences. And I think it kind of touches on the ephemeral nature of different stages of your life and the inability to really go back and inhabit those moments with any sort of authenticity. So it has grown on me, but I needed a few more breadcrumbs. I think some of the characters and some of the reminiscences are she does that thing where she kind of keeps you at arm's length. It's quite distant feeling, which isn't really my thing. So I wasn't primed to love this book, but it has grown on me, and we'll see at the end if it grows on me anymore where I rank this, but those are my thoughts. I have finished The Anomaly by Hervé Le Tellier, and this was translated by Adriana Hunter, and I listened to it on audiobook narrated by Dominic Hoffman. And this book really surprised me. I didn't really look up any of the books that were in this round. And I guess just my own assumptions. I didn't expect any sort of genre fiction or speculative elements, I guess. But this book is science fiction. But I think everyone pretty much knows that this is sci-fi except for me. So yeah, that surprised me. I really, really liked this book. This one I'm going to try not to say too much about because I think there's just so much weird and wonderful to discover about it. And I double checked what the blurb on Goodreads says because there was one thing I was going to mention and I figured it was probably in the blurb, but it's not. So I'm going to be giving kind of the very bare bones, vaguest of ideas of what this is about. Essentially what happens is we're following a handful of people who were all on board the same flight from Paris to, I think it's New York. And there's 200 and some odd people on this flight. Something happens to them on this flight that is outside of something that we would consider normal. There's an abnormal event that happens that's not really explainable. And the story follows a few of these people as we see what happens to them because of this anomaly that they've all experienced. You've got a wide range of characters that you follow. There's a hitman, there's an attorney, there's an author, you know, there are a couple people who are dating but are like having problems. There's like a family on board, like a mother and her 2 kids. There's a singer from Nigeria who's just hit it big with this kind of like one of their songs going viral. So these are the characters we're following. I can't really say much else because I think I would be getting into territory where I would be maybe robbing people of some of the joy of like discovering what's happened, but it definitely took me by surprise. I like science fiction that are about like just like these one ideas that you get to expand on. What they go through makes you think like how you would react in that situation, and each character reacts to this reality of what's happened in a different way, and we get to see that play out with all of them. I was like 5-star for like the majority of this book. I'm like, oh my god, this is like great, I'm loving it. Towards the end, I wasn't disappointed with the ending or anything like that, but there was just something about the last few chapters where it kind of petered out. I mean, there was like an ending, but leading up to that ending, I felt like it was starting to peter out a little bit. I think maybe part of that was the book was following too many characters. Like maybe some of them could have been trimmed because some of the storylines were just a lot more interesting than others, and then that would have given more time to dig deeper into those characters. So that's my only like mild criticism. But on the whole, I really enjoyed this, and I'm still thinking about the ending and trying to interpret what I think it might mean. And yeah, I'll be thinking about this book for a while, and definitely recommend, especially to sci-fi lovers. But like, even if you're more into literary stuff, I think there's enough like delving into how the characters are reacting to their situation. So yeah, love this, and I'll check back with the next book soon. I have finished The Art of Losing by Alice Zeniter, translated by Frank Wynne. It took me longer to get into it versus The Anomaly, where I was in it almost from page like 1 or 2. This one is a contender for the top. I still haven't made up my mind, and I won't do my rankings until the end, but I ended up really, really liking this one. So what it's about, it's a generational story. So it follows 3 characters throughout the book. And this centers on the Algerian independence from France, the Revolutionary War. I don't know what the war is called, but late 1950s to early 1960s, that's where the story starts. So, like I said, it follows 3 characters through this family. So the first perspective we get is Ali. He ends up being the grandfather of the story, but he's the patriarch. He owns some olive groves in Algeria. He had previously fought in the Second World War as like one of the auxiliary units for France, because even though he lives in Algeria, like obviously they were using soldiers from places they had colonized. So he had fought for France technically during the Second World War. He is kind of the big man on campus. He owns these olive groves. He's the boss. Life is good. He's the eldest son and has basically a great life. And things change rapidly as the revolution starts. Because of his ties with France, that ends up putting his family in like a dangerous position, and they have to flee the country in 1962 when everything comes to a head. And that's the first part of the story. The second part of the story, we follow his eldest son, Hamid, who was born in Algeria. When they fled, I think he was like maybe 8 years old. He was young. And so he basically grows up in France. And we follow kind of his difficult spot as a child of immigrants and as an immigrant himself. He was basically raised as a French kid in France, but he has this experience fleeing war, and his parents are very much Algerian. And the last part of the story, we follow Naima, who is Hamid's daughter, and she is even more French, and having been born there, and more detached from her like ancestral roots. and her story kind of follows the desire to learn more about Algeria and feel more connected to that part of her heritage. I just really love how the author tied the through line, like tied these stories together is what I'm trying to say. Ali was on the losing end of that war and having to basically flee to France. And so there is that meaning of the art of being on the losing side of a war. But as you read on, you realize it's also the art of like losing culture and losing roots, losing language. Naima doesn't really speak Arabic, or there's another more like local language or dialect, which I'm forgetting the name of right now. But she's lost that. She knows like a few words and that's it. The way the author moves through the perspectives, I just thought worked really well. There's some great stuff in here about feeling torn between things. Like Ali feels torn because he loves Algeria and he loves his country, but he was torn between, you know, revolutionaries, people who wanted independence, and wanting to be secure as a French citizen technically, and keeping his war pension and like all this kind of stuff. He doesn't view it as like taking sides, he just views it as keeping his family safe. The way the author looks at the changing dynamics from Ali being this patriarch, and then when he's in France having to rely on his son to read legal documents and like wade through French bureaucracy with him and help like fill out paperwork, and there's a loss of power, and he's no longer he doesn't feel like the head of the household anymore, and Hamid has taken on all of this responsibility, and his father kind of falls down in his estimation, and it's humiliating for Ali, and it is frustrating for Hamid, and there's this back and forth of Hamid thinking his parents don't understand anything, whereas they think he doesn't understand anything because he doesn't know what it's like for them. And then Naima is torn between feeling very much like a French woman and being a French woman, but having this part of her history that she doesn't know about because her father and her grandfather never wanted to talk about anything, and she can't really communicate with her grandmother because they don't speak the same language. My grandparents were immigrants, and I think a lot of the stuff, like, it was a very different circumstance. My grandparents weren't Algerian, I'm not French, but they fled Italy after the Second World War and ended up in Canada. And like a lot of the stuff just rings so true that I think every immigration experience is different, but there are these common themes, these common threads. And I think it was explored really well. It was slow going at first, but I feel like this is one of those books that once you get to the end, that elevates it, because then all of the stories come together to make a cohesive whole. So I will check in soon with the next book. I have finished The Phone Booth at the Edge of the World by Laura Imai Messina, translated by Lucy Rand. I really enjoyed this book. I don't really have anything negative to say about it at all. I don't think it's going to be top for me. Well, I know it's not going to be top for my ranking, but like I said, I don't really have anything negative to say about it. I think it's a solid story. I think it really captures emotion, and I think that it accomplished what it set out to do. The book is about a phone booth in Japan in kind of a remote area, and it's a place people can go to talk to loved ones who have passed away. The idea being that you just talk into this phone, you talk into the wind essentially, and your voice is carried off. And it's a place where people go, maybe for healing, maybe to work through their emotions, maybe to keep a connection with loved ones. It's based on a real phone booth in Japan. This story centers a woman who lost her mother and 3-year-old daughter in the 2011 tsunami. She goes to this phone booth and she talks to the caretaker of this phone, and she visits the gardens, and she does find some solace there, but she can't bring herself to actually talk into the phone. On her first trip, she meets someone and they develop a friendship, and they go every month to the phone, and she never talks into it. And he does, and it's about their relationship, and it's about our main character's growth and how she works through this awful trauma that she's been through. The writing is very simple and understated, which I think works really well because it kind of pulls back. It's not overly flowery or sentimental, and it just kind of lets the characters' emotions speak for themselves. What I liked about this is I think it would have been really easy to make this story to be very manipulative, to manipulate the reader. I did tear up, but I never felt manipulated. I felt that the characters' emotions and the author's words were genuine, and you can tell that the author has a real reverence and respect for this phone booth and what it offers people. I felt that it was very delicately told and a very just gentle story. It didn't blow me away, so it's not going to be my top book, but I really liked it, and I think I was predisposed to like it as someone who really likes reading about grief and the grief process. I will check in with the last book soon. I finished the last book, The Brickmakers by Selva Almada, translated by Annie McDermott. So unfortunately, this just wasn't the book for me. The story is following these two families, primarily following the two fathers and the two eldest sons in these families. It's a story of kind of this ongoing family feud that starts with the fathers, ends with the sons, and how the sons start off as friends, but kind of childhood friends, but become enemies and kind of carry on this tradition. We know from the first page, so this isn't a spoiler, we know from the first page, it's also in the blurb, that the sons are going to die. The book starts with them both kind of bleeding out at this fairground, in this field. You kind of move back and forth, back to the past of the sons, back to the father's stories, and then come back again to them dying. And so it kind of goes back and forth. It wasn't the going back and forth that bothered me so much. It did take a little while. I wasn't exactly sure what was happening at first, or sometimes it was a little bit confusing where we were. But I quickly got over that. So overall that worked fine. But for whatever reason, I just couldn't care. I don't know what it was. It's really hard to pinpoint. I didn't feel anything about the characters, didn't feel compelled to finish the story. And I don't think that was just because, I know how it ends. That wasn't the issue either. It might be that I didn't feel like I was getting anything new or any perspective. Okay, there's this ongoing feud that carries over to the next generation and ends up the downfall of both families. There wasn't a unique perspective to that kind of story, and I don't really have much else to say about it. This is not really that in-depth of a review. I wasn't compelled. I wasn't drawn to the characters. I wasn't drawn in by the themes that were explored. Maybe that was it. Maybe I don't think that the themes were well explored. I'm not sure. It just didn't do it for me at all. So with that, we are going to go into my rankings, and I'm going to do a little prediction as well, because I like trying to predict what will win. So I thought a lot about this because it actually was quite hard for me to rank these. Not for the bottom. The Brickmakers is number 6 for me. That was easy to put there because I just didn't get along with that book at all. But the number 5 and 4 spot were more difficult for me. Initially, I thought I would put Disquiet at number 5 because I had problems with it, even though the story was compelling and I thought the writing was really good. And I thought I would put How to Order the Universe at number 4. But I'm going to have to go the other way around. I liked How to Order the Universe, but it has not stuck with me at all. And even though I have some major problems with Disquiet, I remember the story. I remember the things that I did like about it, whereas with How to Order the Universe, I remember almost nothing. And so I'm putting How to Order the Universe at number 5 and Disquiet at number 4. So my top 3, number 3, I'm going to give to The Phone Booth at the Edge of the World. I think it told the story of grief well. Number 1 and 2 were also very hard for me because I loved The Anomaly as I was reading it more than I loved The Art of Losing as I was reading it. I was just compelled through The Anomaly. I thought it was so great. However, I think The Art of Losing stayed strong through the entire novel and had a more satisfying arc for the characters and the family story overall, whereas The Anomaly I thought had a few too many characters, and so trying to follow all of these different characters and wrap them up at the end, I thought some of those characters could have been cut. Frankly, I thought it got a little too spread out, a little bit too thin. So I'm going to put, as much as it pains me because I loved it, I'm going to put The Anomaly at number 2, and I'm going to put The Art of Losing at number 1. Now, what do I think is going to win? I think actually Disquiet is going to win because I do think it was beautifully written, and I don't think everyone is going to know about some of the problems. I didn't know about the problems with the weird translation thing. I think the writing in that book is going to appeal to the most people. So I'm going to predict that Disquiet is going to win. Number 2 and 3, I don't know what's going to get number 2 and 3, so we'll just say number 2 and 3 in some sort of order, I think are going to be The Art of Losing and The Brickmakers. Although it didn't work for me, I can kind of see people being drawn to that kind of story of family tragedy. So that's what I think. Disquiet is going to win, and I think in number 2 and 3 are going to be The Brickmakers and The Art of Losing. Not necessarily in that order. So those are my predictions. Thank you all for watching. If you've read any of these books, I of course would love to have a chat with you. Leave a comment below, and we'll chat soon. Take care. Bye.